The maid saves the millionaire from a pool accident, and he discovers that she is pregnant. Isabella Rodriguez's high-pitched scream echoed through the gardens of the Montgomery mansion as her heart raced in her chest. Through the crystal-clear water of the pool, she could see the motionless silhouette of William Montgomery floating a few meters below the surface. Without hesitation, Isabella threw down her cell phone and dived in, still dressed in her gray housekeeper's uniform. The three-story mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, had been her workplace for the last 2 years. At 28, Isabella never imagined that her meticulous routine of organizing the house would be interrupted by such a dramatic moment. As her hands reached for her boss's unconscious body, she mentally thanked him for the life-saving classes she had taken during her teenage years in Arizona. With surprising strength for her delicate body, Isabella pulled William to the surface. His muscles protested as she dragged him to the edge of the pool, aware that every second was precious. William Montgomery, at 35, was a tall, athletic man, but at that moment he seemed terribly vulnerable. "Mr. Montgomery, William," Isabella shouted, immediately starting mouth-to-mouth breathing and chest compressions. Her hands were shaking, but her movements were precise. Water dripped from her dark hair and onto William's pale face. After what seemed like an eternity, William coughed violently, expelling water. His blue eyes opened, disoriented, finding Isabella's anxious face. What happened?" he muttered, his voice hoarse. "You nearly drowned," Isabella replied, her voice betraying the fear she still felt. "I'll call an ambulance." William tried to sit up, but Isabella stopped him with surprising firmness. "Don't move yet," she ordered, momentarily forgetting the hierarchy between them. His heart was still racing, partly from physical exertion, partly from worry. Minutes later, the sirens of the ambulance broke the tranquility of the luxurious neighborhood. The paramedics arrived quickly, taking over William's care. Isabella watched from a distance, nervously wringing her wet hands in her drenched uniform. "You saved my life," William said later, already in the hospital, his voice stronger but still charged with emotion. Isabella was sitting in a chair next to her bed, still wearing her wet clothes. She had called Margaret, William's sister, who was on her way to Boston. "Anyone would have done the same," Isabella replied softly, avoiding his eyes. She could feel his intense gaze on her, studying her face as if seeing her for the first time. "No, not anyone," William insisted. It was then that his gaze caught something different about Isabella, a small bulge in her abdomen that her wet uniform could no longer hide. "Isabella, are you?" She instinctively put her hand over her 4-month belly, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "Yes," she admitted, finally meeting his eyes. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken concern. William frowned, clearly upset. "And you dived in to save me? You could have been hurt. You could have lost the baby." "I didn't think," Isabella confessed, her voice low. "I just saw you there and I reacted." The heart monitor next to the bed marked William's heartbeat, which had accelerated slightly. He tried to sit up straighter, groaning with the effort. "Why are you still working? In your condition, carrying heavy things up and down stairs?" "I need the work," Isabella replied simply, but there was more to her words than she let on. As an immigrant who had only gained her citizenship 3 years ago, every opportunity was precious. As a soon-to-be single mother, every dollar mattered. William opened his mouth to argue, but was interrupted by the loud arrival of his sister Margaret. The moment of intimacy was broken, but something had changed irrevocably between them. In the days that followed, William recuperated at home, and Isabella continued her chores, although now under the watchful and concerned eye of her boss. She would catch him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his face marked by an expression she couldn't decipher. One afternoon, while Isabella was organizing the books in the library, William confronted her. "I can't let you go on like this," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "It's too risky for you and the baby." Isabella felt her heart squeeze. "Are you firing me, Mr. Montgomery?" "No," he replied quickly, taking a step towards her. "I'm suggesting a change of role, something less physically demanding. And please, after you save my life, I think you can call me William." The look they exchanged at that moment was charged with something deeper than gratitude or professional concern. It was a connection that neither of them was prepared to admit, let alone explore. Isabella lowered her eyes, feeling the baby move in her womb, as if responding to the tension of the moment. The Montgomery mansion, with its imposing walls and meticulously tended gardens, would hold many more secrets in the months to come. And as the Connecticut sun set over the horizon, casting golden shadows through the library windows, Isabella and William remained silent, each lost in thought about how a moment of near tragedy had changed their lives forever. News of William Montgomery's near drowning spread quickly through Greenwich's social circles. The morning after the incident, Isabella found the mansion's kitchen full of floral arrangements and get-well cards sent by friends and associates of the Montgomerys. As she arranged the flowers in crystal vases, her mind kept going back to the moment her eyes met William's in the hospital. "Miss Rodriguez." Margaret Montgomery's voice surprised her. William's sister was standing in the kitchen doorway, impeccably dressed in a Chanel ensemble. "Can we talk?" Isabella nodded, drying her hands on her apron. Margaret indicated the formal living room, a room that Isabella usually only cleaned, never occupied. The two women sat down, creating a striking contrast. Margaret on her creamy velvet sofa, Isabella on the edge of an armchair, conscious of her simple uniform. "I want to thank you personally for saving my brother," Margaret began, her voice controlled. "It was an act of extraordinary courage, especially considering his condition." Her eyes rested briefly on Isabella's belly. "As I told Mr. Montgomery, anyone would have done the same," Isabella replied, keeping her composure. "But it wasn't just anyone, it was you." Margaret leaned forward. "And now William is insisting on changing your duties, creating a special position for you. He's always been protected, but this," she paused significantly, "this feels different." Isabella felt her face heat up. "I assure you, I have no intention other than to do my job, Miss Montgomery." "Of course not," Margaret smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "I just want to make sure we understand each other. William can be impulsive when it comes to helping others. It wouldn't be the first time his generosity has been misinterpreted." Before Isabella could reply, they heard footsteps in the hallway. William appeared in the doorway, still pale but standing. "Meg, I didn't know you were here," he said, his gaze alternating between the two women. "Just thanking Ms. Rodriguez once again." Margaret rose gracefully. "I have a meeting at the hospital board. Get some rest, dear." After Margaret left, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Isabella stood up too, ready to get back to her business, but William stopped her. "What exactly did my sister say?" "Nothing important," Isabella lied, avoiding his gaze. "Mr. Montgomery, William," he corrected automatically. "William," she relented. "I appreciate your concern, but I don't need any special treatment. I can continue my duties as normal." "It's not special treatment, it's common sense." He moved closer, his presence filling the space. "Besides, I have a proposal that could benefit both of us." Isabella raised an eyebrow, curious. "I need someone to organize my diary and correspondence. Margaret is right about one thing. I'm terrible with administrative details. And you've already proved yourself to be extremely competent and reliable." The way he said the last word made something vibrate inside her. "Are you offering me a promotion?" "I'm offering you a solution," he corrected softly. "The office next to the library has been empty since my last assistant retired. You'd have your own space, more flexible hours for medical appointments," and he hesitated, "a significantly higher salary." Isabella felt her heart race. The extra money would be a blessing with a baby on the way, but the daily proximity to William, "I need to think about it." "Of course," he nodded, respecting her space. "But Isabella," he called out when she was already at the door, "you're not alone in this." That night, in her small apartment in the center of Greenwich, Isabella sat on her bed, stroking her belly as she read once again the letter that had arrived from Arizona. Her mother had expressed concern about her situation, offering her to come home. But Greenwich had become her home in recent years, and now, her phone vibrated with a message. It was William. "I have a follow-up appointment at the hospital tomorrow. I'd like you to come with me. We need to talk." Isabella stared longingly at the message, her finger hovering over the screen. Finally, she replied, I'll be there. The next day, while driving to Greenwich Hospital with William in the passenger seat, he wasn't yet cleared to drive. Isabella realized how unexpectedly their lives had become intertwined. The man next to her was no longer just her boss. He was someone she had brought back to life, someone who now seemed determined to return the favor. "Why were you in the pool that day?" she asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. William tensed for a moment. "I got dizzy. It happened sometime since," he stopped, clearly uncomfortable. Since I lost my wife 3 years ago," he added softly. "Stress, the doctors say, but it's never been this bad before." Isabella absorbed the information in silence, her hands tightening slightly on the steering wheel. There was so much she didn't know about him, so much he didn't know about her. And yet, there was an undeniable connection between them, something that went beyond gratitude or professional hierarchy. The hospital loomed ahead, its glass walls reflecting the morning sun. As she looked for a parking space, Isabella knew she was about to make a decision that would change not only her life, but that of the baby she was carrying. And maybe, just maybe, William Montgomery's life too. William's follow-up appointment revealed more than just his physical progress. While the doctor examined the test results, Isabella watched William's hands, strong, but with a slight tremor that he tried to disguise. Dr. Harrison's office, with its muted walls and framed diplomas, seemed too small to contain the silent tension between them. "Mr. Montgomery, your tests show a satisfactory recovery, but I'm concerned about your stress levels." Dr. Harrison adjusted his glasses, looking directly at William. "The episode in the pool wasn't just an ordinary accident. Your tests indicate that you had a severe anxiety attack." Isabella felt her heart squeeze as she watched William stiffen in his chair. She knew that posture. It was the same one he assumed during difficult meetings in a mansion office. "How long before I could get back to my normal routine?" William asked, deliberately ignoring the most worrying diagnosis. "Physically, 2 weeks. But I strongly recommend that you seek psychological help." The doctor paused significantly. "Losing someone is not something we simply get over with time, Mr. Montgomery. We need help to process the grief properly." On the way back to the mansion, the silence in the car was thick as fog. Isabella drove carefully, occasionally casting worried glances at William, who kept his eyes fixed on the landscape passing by the window. "You don't have to do this," he said suddenly. "Do what?" "Worry about me. Look after me. You already did more than enough by saving me that day." Isabella parked the car in the driveway of the mansion before answering. "Maybe I want to worry," she said softly. "Maybe it's time someone looked after you too." The look William gave her was full of vulnerability. For a moment, she saw beyond the successful businessman, beyond the boss. She saw only a man struggling with his own shadows. "I accept your offer," Isabella continued, her voice firm. "The office job, but on one condition." William raised an eyebrow, surprised. "What?" "That you seek professional help. If you're worried about my health and that of the baby, I also have the right to worry about yours." A reluctant smile appeared on William's lips. "You're amazing, Isabella Rodriguez." In the weeks that followed, the dynamic at the Montgomery mansion changed subtly. Isabella took up her new post in the office next to the library, organizing not only William's schedule, but also bringing an order that had long been lacking in his professional life. Mornings began with coffee and a review of the day's appointments, moments that gradually became more personal than professional. One particularly hectic morning, while Isabella was organizing a pile of contracts, she felt the baby move vigorously. Her surprised "oh" attracted the attention of William, who was reviewing documents on his desk. "All right?" he asked, immediately alert. "Yes, just," she smiled, placing her hand on her stomach. "He's especially agitated today." William hesitated for a moment before asking, "Can I?" His gesture towards her belly was shy, almost reverent. Isabella nodded, taking his hand and guiding it to the spot where the baby was kicking. The moment William felt the movement, his eyes widened with astonishment, and something in his face softened in a way she had never seen before. "It's incredible," he murmured, his hand still resting gently on her belly. "Have you chosen a name yet?" "Nicholas," she replied. "It was my father's name." "It's a beautiful name," William said, finally withdrawing his hand, although he seemed reluctant to do so. Isabella, there's something I need to tell you. At that moment, Margaret entered the office without knocking, interrupting whatever William was about to say. Her sharp eyes caught the closeness between them, and her expression hardened. "William, we need to discuss the hospital's charity event," Margaret announced, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. In private, Isabella stood up, preparing to leave, but William stopped her. "Isabella's my assistant now, Meg. She can stay." "Of course," Margaret smiled, but her gaze was icy. "After all, she seems to be making herself indispensable, doesn't she?" The tension in the room was palpable. Isabella could feel the weight of the unspoken words, of Margaret's suspicions and worries, of whatever William was about to reveal. As she organized her notes for the meeting, she wondered at what point her life had become so intertwined with the Montgomerys, and if there was any way to protect her heart from what she was beginning to feel for William. The afternoon sun streamed in through the tall windows of the office, creating golden patterns on the Persian carpet. Outside, the gardens of the Montgomery mansion held their own secrets, as did the hearts that beat within their walls. And as Margaret began to detail the plans for the charity event, Isabella couldn't help thinking that some stories, once started, couldn't be stopped, only lived until their inevitable end. The Greenwich Hospice charity event was scheduled for that evening, and the Montgomery mansion was buzzing with final preparations. Isabella, in her new role as personal assistant, was checking the guest list for the third time when William entered her office, absent-mindedly adjusting the tie of his tuxedo. "Let me help," Isabella offered, getting up from her desk. Her fingers worked deftly at the knot of his tie, trying to ignore the proximity between them. The soft scent of his cologne filled the space between them. "About what I wanted to tell you before," William began, but was interrupted by Margaret, who seemed to have developed a special talent for appearing at the most inconvenient moments. "William, the first guests are already arriving," she announced, casting a meaningful glance at Isabella's hands, still in her brother's tie. "Isabella, I assume you finished organizing the details of the event?" "Yes, Miss Montgomery. Everything is ready." "Good. Then you can go home now. Social events are not part of your remit." "Actually," William interjected, his voice firm, "I've asked Isabella to stay. I'll need her to coordinate some aspects of the event." Margaret pressed her lips together in a thin line, but didn't object. After she left, William turned to Isabella. "There's a dress in the guest room closet. I didn't think you'd have time to go home and change." Isabella stared at him in surprise. "You bought me a dress? Consider it a thank you for all the extra hours over the last few weeks," he smiled. But there was something else in his eyes, something that made her heart race. An hour later, Isabella was walking down the stairs of the mansion, wearing an elegant navy blue dress that fell perfectly over her pregnant belly. The murmur of conversation and the soft music of the orchestra filled the air. She watched William greeting the guests, noticing how his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "So you're the famous Isabella," a male voice surprised her. Turning around, she found a tall, gray-haired man. "Robert Walsh. I'm the doctor who looked after Catherine, William's wife." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Walsh. William told me about how you saved him," he continued, studying her with interest. "You know, in all these years, I've never seen him so alive as in the last few weeks." "Dr. Walsh," Isabella chose her words carefully. "How exactly did Catherine pass away?" "William never talks about it." The doctor hesitated, looking around before answering quietly. "It was a car accident. William was driving. The investigation cleared him completely, but he never forgave himself. The anxiety attack started after that." The revelation hit Isabella like a punch in the gut. Now she understood better the weight William carried, the guilt that consumed him. "Isabella," William's voice brought her back to the present. "Are you all right? You look pale." "Just a little tired," she forced a smile. "The baby's fussy today." William placed a protective hand on her back, guiding her to a quieter spot in the garden. Decorative lights flickered between the trees, creating an almost magical atmosphere. "What did Dr. Walsh tell you?" he asked softly. "William, why didn't you tell me about the accident?" He closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering his courage. "Because every time I talk about it, I relive that night. The rain, the sharp bend, the truck that came out of nowhere, and the silence afterwards. That terrible silence when I realized Catherine had left. Isabella felt tears forming in her eyes. Without thinking, she took his hand between hers. "It wasn't your fault. Everyone tells me that," but he paused, looking down at their entwined hands. "When you found me in the pool, part of me didn't want to go back. But then you brought me back, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt that maybe there was a purpose in going on." The moment was interrupted by a sudden movement in Isabella's stomach. William smiled, placing his free hand on the spot. "Nicholas seems to agree. He always gets more agitated when you're around," Isabella admitted, blushing slightly. "Isabella," William began, his tone serious. "There's something I need to tell you. These last few months, having you here, have made me realize that William—" Margaret's voice cut through the night air. "The council representatives want to talk to you." Isabella felt William squeeze her hand lightly before turning away. Watching him walk back to the party, she realized that she was falling in love with her boss. And from the look he threw over his shoulder, perhaps she wasn't the only one dealing with unexpected feelings. The full moon hung over the Montgomery mansion, a silent witness to hearts that were beginning to heal and a love that was blossoming between the lines of a story marked by loss and redemption. Isabella stroked her belly, feeling Nicholas move again, as if he too understood that their lives were about to change forever. The morning after the charity event, Isabella found a white rose on her desk in the office. There was no card, but she knew it was from William. It had the same subtle touch as the navy blue dress, now hanging carefully in her closet at home, a tangible reminder of the night before. The buzz of the party still echoed in her mind, as did Dr. Walsh's revelations about the accident that had taken Catherine's life. As she organized the day's correspondence, Isabella couldn't stop thinking about William driving that rainy night, about the weight of the guilt he had been carrying for 3 years. "Good morning," William's voice surprised her. He was standing in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee, a regular for himself and a decaf for her, as had become their morning ritual. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," she replied, accepting the cup. "And you?" "Actually, I spent most of the night thinking," he said, sitting down in the chair opposite her desk. "About yesterday, about what I couldn't tell you." The phone rang, interrupting the moment. Isabella answered, maintaining her professionalism despite her racing heart. It was a hospital. The results of her last prenatal tests were ready. "I need to go to the hospital this afternoon," she informed after hanging up. "It's just a routine appointment." "I'll drive you," William offered immediately. At her surprised look, he added, "I have a meeting with the hospital board anyway. Besides," he hesitated, "I'd like to be more involved, if you'll allow it." The sincerity in his voice made something melt inside her. "William, you don't have to do this. It's been so long." "Isabella," he leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "After Catherine died, I thought I'd never be able to care about anyone like that again. But you and Nicholas, you changed everything." The moment was interrupted by footsteps in the corridor. Margaret entered, carrying a folder of documents. Her sharp gaze caught the closeness between them, the rose on the table, the cups of coffee. "We need to talk about the investments on the West Coast," she announced, deliberately ignoring Isabella. "In private." "It can wait, Meg," William replied, without taking his eyes off Isabella. "I have other commitments this afternoon." "More important than family business?" "Yes," he said simply, finally turning to his sister. "Much more important." Margaret paled, her lips tightening into a thin line. "William, can I talk to you in your office?" Now, when she was alone, Isabella allowed her hands to tremble slightly. The intensity of William's gaze, the way he had practically declared his feelings, it was more than she was prepared to process. At 2 in the afternoon, William drove his Audi down Park Avenue towards Greenwich Hospital. The silence in the car was comfortable, punctuated only by the soft sound of the radio playing jazz. "What did Margaret say?" Isabella finally asked. William sighed, his hands lightly gripping the steering wheel. "She's worried that I'm getting too emotionally involved. She thinks I haven't been thinking clearly since the accident in the pool." "And you are?" "Thinking clearly," he smiled slightly. "For the first time in years, yes. Margaret doesn't understand that sometimes clarity comes when we allow ourselves to care again." In Dr. Chen's office, Isabella lay on the gurney for the ultrasound, aware of William's presence beside her. When Nicholas' image appeared on the screen, his perfect heart beating strong and regular, she felt William take her hand. "It's amazing," he murmured, his eyes fixed on the screen. Dr. Chen smiled, moving the transducer. "Do you want to know the sex of the baby?" "We already know it's a boy," Isabella replied. Actually, the doctor paused, adjusting the angle. "I'm seeing a girl here." The shock of the revelation made Isabella instinctively squeeze William's hand. "But in the other ultrasounds, sometimes babies are shy," Dr. Chen explained. "But today she's in a perfect position for us to see. Congratulations, you're expecting a girl." On the way back to the mansion, Isabella was still processing the news. "I think I need to rethink the name," she said softly. "How about Catherine?" William suggested, his voice heavy with emotion. Isabella looked at him in surprise. "You want me to name my daughter after your wife?" William parked the car in the driveway before answering. Catherine believed that love had the power to heal all wounds. "I spent 3 years trying to prove her wrong, until you came along and showed her that she was right all along." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning. Isabella felt tears forming in her eyes, a mixture of pregnancy hormones and pure emotion. "William, don't say anything yet," he asked softly. "There's more I need to tell you, more I need to sort out. But I want you to know that, for the first time since I lost Catherine, I feel like I found a new purpose. And it's thanks to you." The afternoon sun cast golden shadows through the car windows, illuminating William's face in a way that made her heart ache. Isabella knew they were on the verge of something profound and transformative, something that would change their lives forever. Little Catherine, still safe in her womb, moved as if sensing the intensity of the moment. And there, in the shared silence of a car parked in front of a mansion that held so many secrets, two bruised hearts began to find their way back to the light. The revelation of the baby's sex provoked a series of subtle changes in the dynamics of the Montgomery mansion. Isabella noticed how William began to include more shades of pink in small details of the office. A pen holder here, a vase of flowers there. It was his silent way of showing that little Catherine already occupied a space in his life. One particularly busy morning, Isabella found an old box on her desk. Inside, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, was a delicate musical mobile with little golden angels. It was Catherine's. William's voice surprised her. He was standing in the doorway, watching her reaction. Her mother gave it to her when she was born. Catherine always said that one day it would pass to our daughter. Isabella felt a lump in her throat. "William, I can't accept that. It's too personal too." "Please," he approached, picking up the mobile carefully. "I know Margaret wouldn't approve, but I feel it's the right thing to do. Catherine would have wanted it that way." Before Isabella could reply, the phone rang. It was the real estate agent. Her landlord had decided to sell the apartment where she lived, and she would have 30 days to find a new place. "This is ridiculous," William protested as she hung up. "With the Greenwich housing market in such a state, finding something suitable in such a short time will be impossible." "I'll manage," Isabella replied, trying to keep calm despite her growing panic. "Maybe in Stamford the rents are more." "Move here," William said abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella stared at him, certain that she had misunderstood. "The mansion has an entire wing that's practically empty," he continued, running his hand through his hair in a nervous gesture. "You could have your own space, be closer to work, and when the baby is born—" "William," Isabella interrupted him gently, "you know that would only give more ammunition to the comments that already exist." "What comments?" "The looks from the staff, the whispers when they think I'm not listening, how they think I gotta be your assistant, why you've changed so much since the accident in the pool." William moved closer, his expression serious. "And since when do we care what other people think? Since your sister called me into her office yesterday? That caught his attention." "What? Margaret did what?" Isabella sighed, remembering the uncomfortable conversation. "She's worried that you're making up for the loss of Catherine by getting close to me and the baby. She said it would be better for everyone if I look for another job after the child is born." William's expression darkened. "She had no right. She's trying to protect you," Isabella argued softly. And maybe she's right about some things. Maybe we're confusing gratitude with something else. Is that what you think it is? William asked, his voice low but intense. Gratitude? Before Isabella could answer, they felt a presence at the door. It was Rosa, the housekeeper who had taken over Isabella's old duties. Miss Montgomery is on the phone. She insists it's urgent. William closed his eyes for a moment, visibly frustrated by the interruption. We'll continue this conversation later, he said to Isabella before leaving. Alone in her office, Isabella let her hands rest on her belly, feeling her daughter move. Catherine? The name now carried a different weight, a responsibility that went beyond paying homage to William's late wife. That afternoon, while organizing some files, Isabella found an old photo that had fallen out of a folder. In it, William was smiling next to a beautiful brown-haired woman, Catherine. They looked so happy, so complete. The date on the back showed that the photo had been taken just 2 weeks before the accident. She was radiant, wasn't she? William's voice startled her. He had returned without her realizing it. Yes, she was, Isabella agreed, trying to hand the photo back, but William stopped her. Do you know what else I remember about Catherine? He asked, taking a seat on the edge of the table. Her ability to see the good in everything. Even in the most difficult situations, she found hope. He paused, looking directly at Isabella. Like you, William, I'm not confusing things, Isabella. What I feel for you is different, it's new. Catherine will always be part of my story, but you, he hesitated, searching for the right words. You're my present, and I hope my future too. The moment was interrupted by the sound of heels in the hallway. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her eyes narrowing as she saw how close they were. The meeting with the investors has been brought forward, she announced. We need to go now, William. As she watched William go, Isabella felt the weight of all the complications surrounding her growing feelings for him. Montgomery Manor, with its imposing walls and rich history, seemed both a refuge and a prison for their wavering hearts. Little Catherine stirred again, as if sensing her mother's agitation. Isabella stroked her belly, looking at the angel mobile that still rested on her desk. Some stories, she was beginning to realize, were destined to intertwine, no matter how many obstacles stood in the way. Margaret's decision to confront Isabella had triggered a series of events that no one at Montgomery Manor could have predicted. The morning after her interrupted conversation with William, Isabella arrived at work to find a thick folder on her desk. Inside, yellowed newspaper clippings detailed the accident that had taken Catherine Montgomery's life. His hands shook as he read the headlines. Businessman William Montgomery unharmed in fatal crash. The photos showed the wrecked car, the wet road, the twisted guardrail. But it was a small note at the end of one of the articles that caught his eye. Catherine was 3 months pregnant when she died. I see Margaret has left her present. William's voice sounded from the doorway, startling Isabella. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept. Why would she do that? William entered the office, closing the door behind him. Because she thinks you need to know the whole truth before, he hesitated, before we get carried away with something that maybe shouldn't happen. Isabella felt her throat tighten. The baby, you never mentioned it? Because for 3 years I tried to bury that part of the story with Catherine, he said, sitting down heavily in the chair opposite her desk. That night, we were coming back from a doctor's appointment. Catherine had just told me it was a girl. Little Catherine chose that moment to stir, as if responding to the weight of the revelation. Isabella instinctively put her hand on her belly. That's why Margaret thinks I'm projecting onto you and your baby what I've lost, William continued, his voice low and intense. But she's wrong. What I feel for you, Isabella, has nothing to do with the past. How can you be sure? Isabella asked, her own insecurities coming to the surface. How do you know you're not just trying to fix something that's been broken? William stood up, walking over to the window. The mansion's garden was covered in a thin layer of morning dew, the roses Catherine loved so much beginning to bloom with the arrival of spring. Because for the first time since the accident, I don't feel guilty for wanting to be happy, he turned to face her. You make me want to build a future, not just try to fix the past. The moment was interrupted by a knock on the door. Rosa, the housekeeper, rushed in. Mr. Montgomery, there's an emergency at the company. Mr. Walsh is on the phone. William hesitated, looking between Isabella and the door. "Shall we continue this conversation later?" She nodded, watching him leave. Alone again, she turned her attention to the newspaper clippings. There were more details about the accident, about how William had tried to dodge a truck that had invaded the opposite lane, about how the airbag on the passenger's side had failed. He never got over it. Margaret's voice surprised her. She was standing in the doorway, as elegant as ever in her Channel ensemble. "For 3 years, I've watched my brother wallow in guilt and work. Then you show up, pregnant and vulnerable, and suddenly he's alive again." "I didn't plan any of this," Isabella replied, keeping her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Of course not." Margaret entered the office, her heels echoing on the wooden floor. "But it's happening all the same, and as a sister, I need to make sure that William isn't just replacing one loss with another. I'm not trying to replace Catherine. Not consciously, perhaps." Margaret picked up one of the photos, where Catherine was smiling radiantly next to William. "But look at you, pregnant, needing help, awakening all his protective instincts. It's as if the universe is giving William a second chance to save what he lost that night." Margaret's words hit Isabella like a punch in the gut. There was truth in them, a truth she had been trying to ignore. "What do you want me to do?" Isabella finally asked. "I want you to do the right thing," Margaret replied, placing an envelope on the table. Inside this envelope is a job offer with a company in Boston. Better salary, full benefits, corporate apartment. A chance to start over, away from all this complication. Isabella looked at the envelope, feeling the weight of the decision she had to make. Little Catherine stirred again, as if protesting against the mere consideration of the offer. "Think about what's best for everyone," Margaret said softly before leaving, including William. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls, but Isabella's mind kept returning to the envelope in her drawer. As the sun began to set, tinging the Greenwich sky with shades of pink and gold, she was still sitting in her office, lost in thought. "Isabella," William's voice brought her back to the present. He was standing in the doorway, watching her with concern. "Is everything all right? You seem distant." She forced a smile, conscious of the envelope weighing down her drawer like a guilty secret. "Just tired. The 3rd trimester is proving harder than I expected." William approached, his face softening with genuine concern. "Why don't you go home and rest? I can drive you." "Actually," Isabella hesitated, gathering her courage, "we need to talk." The sun continued its slow decline over the horizon, casting longer and longer shadows through the office windows. And as Isabella prepared to confront the painful truths Margaret had exposed, little Catherine stirred in her womb, as if she too understood that some decisions, once made, would change the course of many lives forever. Isabella stared at William through the golden light of the sunset that invaded the office, her heart beating wildly. Margaret's envelope weighed down her drawer like lead, an anchor pulling her towards a decision she didn't want to make. "Before we start this conversation," William said, sitting down in the chair opposite her, "there's something you need to see." He pulled out a brown envelope from his jacket, different from the one Margaret had left. "These are the accident investigation reports. The real ones, not the version the newspapers published." Isabella took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, she found official documents detailing mechanical faults in the truck that had caused the accident, positive toxicology on the driver, and a series of pieces of evidence that completely exonerated William. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because Margaret is using my guilt as a weapon," he replied, his voice charged with restrained emotion. "She thinks I'm trying to make amends through you and little Catherine. But the truth is that I've spent 3 years blaming myself for something that was beyond my control." Isabella felt her daughter stir, as if responding to the tension in the room. "William, your sister offered me a job in Boston." The silence that followed her confession was deafening. William stood up abruptly, walking over to the window. The tension in his shoulders was visible even through his well-cut suit. "And you're considering accepting," he said at last, not a question, but a painful realization. "I'm considering what's best for everyone," Isabella replied, her voice trembling slightly. "For you, for your family, for my daughter." "And what does your heart say?" William turned to face her, his eyes intense in the twilight. My heart, Isabella felt tears forming in her eyes. My heart is torn between what I want and what is right. William crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling beside her chair. What if I told you that what's right is exactly what we want? Isabella, I'm not projecting Catherine onto you or your daughter. What I feel is real. It's present. The office door suddenly opened, revealing Margaret accompanied by a man in a suit who Isabella recognized as a member of the company's board of directors. William, Mr. Parker needs to discuss. Margaret stopped as she saw the scene before her, her eyes narrowing. Am I interrupting something? William stood up slowly, his expression closing into a professional mask that Isabella rarely saw. Actually, yes, Maid. And since we're all here, I think it's time to clear a few things up. Margaret paled slightly. William, I don't think this is the moment. This is exactly the time, he interrupted her, his voice firm. Mr. Parker, I'm sorry, but we'll need to reschedule our meeting. We have a family matter to resolve. After the executive's embarrassed exit, the office plunged into a tense silence. Margaret was the first to break it. So you told her about the job in Boston? No, Margaret, Isabella replied before William could speak. You didn't tell him about the job in Boston? I did. William stared at his sister, decades of complex family dynamics evident in his gaze. Why can't you just accept that I've found happiness again? Because I don't want to see you destroyed again. Margaret exploded, her usual composure breaking down. You didn't see what it was like after losing Catherine and the baby. I did. I was there. And now you're getting involved with another pregnant woman, as if the universe is giving you a second chance that could be taken away at any moment. Isabella felt her daughter move vigorously, responding to the commotion around her. Instinctively, she put her hand on her belly, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by any of the siblings. Margaret, she said softly, I understand your concern, but I'm not Catherine, and this baby is not the daughter William lost. We're different people, with our own story. A story that began with you saving his life. Margaret replied bitterly. Don't you see how dangerously similar that is? No, William interjected, his voice firm but gentle. It's completely different. Catherine died because of an accident that I couldn't prevent. Isabella brought me back to life by her own choice. And now I'm choosing to live, Meg. Not just to exist, but to really live. The sun had completely disappeared over the horizon, leaving the office in the soft dimness of indirect lights. In the silence that followed William's statement, Isabella could hear the ticking of the antique clock on the wall, marking seconds that seemed like eternities. What if you get hurt again? Margaret asked, her voice breaking slightly. Then it will be my choice to have risked it, William replied, moving to stand next to Isabella. But I can't live in fear of what might happen. Catherine wouldn't want that. Isabella watched the silent tears that began to run down Margaret's face. Years of protection and fear finally finding an outlet. William noticed too, and within a few steps was hugging his sister, as he probably hadn't done for years. I'm not going anywhere, Isabella said softly, taking the envelope with the job offer out of her drawer and handing it back to Margaret. I belong here. Isabella's decision to stay transformed the dynamic at Montgomery Manor. In the weeks following the confrontation in the office, Margaret began to show reluctant acceptance, although she still kept a cautious distance. It was a subtle progress, evidenced by small gestures. Like the nursery decoration catalog she discreetly left on Isabella's desk one morning. William, for his part, seemed to have found a new balance. The therapy sessions he began attending were helping him to process his grief in a healthier way, and his transformation was visible to everyone at the mansion. Dr. Mitchell thinks I'm ready to visit the accident site, William commented over a shared breakfast in the office. It was an October morning, and the golden leaves danced outside the window. Isabella, now at the beginning of her 8th month of pregnancy, watched him carefully. How do you feel about it? Scared, he admitted, something that months ago would have been impossible. But I think it's necessary. And he hesitated. I'd like you to come with me. The request took her by surprise. Are you sure? It wouldn't be too personal? It's precisely because it's personal that I want you there. William approached, his hands finding hers on the table. You become part of my history, Isabella. Not just of the present, but of the future I want to build. Little Catherine chose that moment to give a particularly hard kick, making Isabella smile. I think someone agrees. The moment was interrupted by Rosa, bringing more mail. Among the envelopes, there was a particularly official one that caught Isabella's eye. It was from the company's Human Resources Department. It's the formalization of your new position, William explained, noticing her curious expression. As Director of Social Operations for the Montgomery Foundation, Isabella opened the envelope with trembling hands. The proposed salary was more than generous, and the responsibilities involved overseeing charitable projects, something she had always dreamed of doing. William, that's deserved, he added firmly. Margaret agreed that we needed someone with your sensibilities to manage our social projects. It was her idea, in fact. The mention of Margaret brought new weight to the conversation. How was she coping with all this? Better than I expected. William smiled slightly. I caught her looking through baby clothes catalogs yesterday. I think the idea of being an aunt is starting to grow on her. The afternoon found them driving along the Connecticut Coast Road, following the same route William had taken on that fateful night 3 years ago. Autumn painted the landscape in shades of red and gold, so different from the rainy night of the accident. When they arrived at the site, marked by a small memorial by the side of the road, William remained in the car for a few moments, his hands gripping the steering wheel. Isabella waited patiently, her silent presence offering the support he needed. "Ready?" she asked softly when she saw him relax his shoulders. William nodded, getting out of the car. The memorial was simple. A bronze plaque with Catherine's name and some fresh flowers, probably left by Margaret. Isabella watched William kneel in front of the plaque, his hands gently touching the cold metal. "Hi, Cat," he began, his voice breaking. "It took me a long time to get here. I'm sorry about that. But I brought someone special with me today." Isabella approached, her hand finding William's shoulder. Little Catherine wriggled in her womb, as if she too wanted to be part of the moment. "You were right," William continued, speaking to Catherine, "about love having the power to heal. It took me a while to understand that, but now I know you were trying to teach me all along." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves on the trees, making some of them dance around them. Isabella felt silent tears streaming down her face, moved by the intimacy of the moment. "Mr. Montgomery?" A voice interrupted the moment. It was an elderly man, carrying a bouquet of flowers. "Mr. Thompson." William stood up, recognizing Catherine's father. "I didn't expect to find you here." "I come every Thursday," Mr. Thompson explained, his eyes resting curiously on Isabella. "And you must be the girl Margaret mentioned?" Isabella felt her heart race, fearing the man's reaction. To her surprise, he smiled gently. "Catherine always said that William needed to learn to live again," he said, placing the flowers on the memorial. "I'm glad he's finally listening." The sun was beginning to set as they left the site, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that reminded Isabella of the first sunset she had shared with William in his office. In the car, he drove in silence, but his hand occasionally found hers, a gesture that said more than words. "Thank you for coming with me today," he finally said, as the lights of Greenwich began to appear on the horizon. "Thank you for letting me be a part of it," she replied softly. The Montgomery mansion awaited them, its windows lit up like beacons guiding them home. And as they walked up the circular driveway, Isabella realized that at some point, without realizing it, this place had truly become her home. Not just the mansion itself, but what it represented. A chance for a fresh start, a promise of a future, a love story that had been born from the ashes of a tragedy, proving that sometimes endings are just new beginnings in disguise. The news of Isabella's pregnancy spread quickly among the staff at the Montgomery mansion, transforming the atmosphere of the place. The spiteful gossip of the first few days gave way to affectionate curiosity, especially after Margaret began to show her silent approval through small gestures. One particularly hectic morning, Isabella found an old wooden box on her desk in the study. Inside, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, was a pair of pastel pink crocheted shoes. "They were Catherine's," Margaret said softly, standing in the doorway. "My mother made them when she found out it was going to be a girl. I thought, well, maybe you'd like them." Isabella felt her throat tighten with the emotion of the moment. "Margaret, I don't know if I can." "Yes, you can," the older woman entered the office, closing the door behind her. It took me a while to understand, but now I see that you're not replacing anyone. You're creating something new, something that's helping all of us to heal. Little Catherine, as if sensing the importance of the moment, gave a soft kick. Isabella instinctively put her hand to her belly, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Margaret. "May I?" she asked hesitantly, holding out her hand. Isabella nodded, taking Margaret's hand and guiding it to the spot where her niece was moving. The smile that lit up the usually serious face of the older woman was transformative. "William looks different," Margaret commented, still with her hand on Isabella's belly. "Dr. Mitchell says he's making impressive progress in therapy. This morning, I found him in Catherine's old room, sorting through some things to donate. He didn't tell me," Isabella replied softly. "Because he wants to surprise you," Margaret smiled. "He's turning the room into a nursery. He's hired a decorator and everything." Isabella felt her heart skip a beat. "But I don't live here yet," Margaret added, arching an eyebrow. "William is waiting for the right moment to ask you. I shouldn't be telling you this," but she hesitated. "I think you need to know how committed he is to this future." Before Isabella could reply, they heard footsteps in the hallway. William appeared in the doorway, pausing in surprise to see the two most important women in his life sharing such an intimate moment. "Am I interrupting something?" he asked, a soft smile playing on his lips. "Actually," Margaret stood up, smoothing out her impeccable dress. "We were just having a necessary conversation." She stopped beside her brother, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Don't spoil it, darling." After Margaret left, William approached Isabella, noticing the crocheted shoes on the table. His eyes softened with recognition. "Meg's really trying," he commented, gently picking up one of the shoes. "Yes, she is," Isabella agreed, watching him carefully. "She told me about the bedroom." William froze for a moment, then let out a soft laugh. "Of course she did. Meg was never good with surprises." He knelt beside Isabella's chair, still holding the slipper. "This isn't how I planned to do it, but since the subject came up—" "William," Isabella began, her heart racing. "No, let me finish," he asked softly. "Isabella Rodriguez, you came into my life like a force of nature. You saved me in more ways than you know. And now," he paused, placing a hand on her belly, "now you're giving me a new chance to have a family. I know it might seem too fast, that maybe we should wait, but—" "Yes," Isabella interrupted him, tears streaming down her face. "Yes?" William asked, a smile lighting up his face. "But I haven't even asked the question properly yet." "Then do it," she smiled through her tears. William took a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "Isabella Rodriguez, will you marry me and make this mansion our home?" The ring was delicate, a vintage solitaire that perfectly matched Isabella's personality. As William slid it on her finger, she noticed a small inscription on the inside. "New beginnings." "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "Catherine wore the Montgomery family ring, but this one always seemed more appropriate for you." The moment was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Rosa, the housekeeper, entered carrying a tray with tea and cookies. "Excuse me, Mr. Montgomery, but Miss Margaret insisted on sending this celebratory snack." She smiled, her eyes sparkling as she noticed the ring on Isabella's finger. "Apparently, everyone in the mansion knew about this plan except me." Isabella laughed, wiping away her tears. "Not everyone," William smiled, "but those who mattered did, including your father in Arizona, who I called last week to ask for his blessing." Isabella felt her heart overflow with love. Little Catherine wiggled again, as if she too wanted to join in the celebration of the moment that would change their lives forever. Outside the office, Margaret watched the scene through the ajar door, a genuine smile on her face. Perhaps Catherine was right after all. Love really did have the power to heal all wounds, even those that seemed impossible to heal. The news of William Montgomery's engagement to his former governess ran through Greenwich like fire through dry straw. The social circles that had once whispered about their relationship were now divided between those who romanticized the story and those who questioned Isabella's true intentions. "Ignore the comments," Margaret surprised Isabella by saying over breakfast on the mansion's veranda. "Half of those people didn't even know Catherine properly, and now they're acting like they're her best friends." Isabella adjusted her position in the chair, her 8-month pregnant body protesting against the antique furniture. It's hard to ignore when the board members' wives look at me like I'm a fortune hunter. Well then, let's give them something different to talk about, Margaret declared, a determined glint in her eyes. What do you think of a wedding before little Catherine is born? In less than a month? Isabella's eyes widened. Margaret, that's perfectly possible with the right contacts, William added, joining them on the balcony. In fact, I've already started some preparations. Isabella looked between the two Montgomery brothers, realizing she was facing a family conspiracy. Did you plan this? Let's just say I had an enlightening conversation with some people at the country club yesterday. Margaret smiled, a gesture reminiscent of a satisfied predator, including Martha Peterson, who was particularly vocal about her humble origins. Meg, William warned, but there was a touch of amusement in his voice. What? I just mentioned that her own grandmother started out as the Roosevelt's housekeeper. Margaret shrugged elegantly. It's amazing how some people have a selective memory about their own family histories. Little Catherine chose that moment to kick particularly hard, making Isabella laugh. I think she approves of her aunt's plan. See, even my niece has common sense, Margaret declared, standing up. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a list of suppliers to contact and a society to elegantly scandalize. After Margaret left, William approached Isabella, his eyes soft with concern. Do you really want this? A hasty wedding? We can wait, do something more traditional? Isabella added, taking his hand. William, nothing in our history is traditional. And honestly, I don't want to wait. Not when we've finally found our happiness. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. The Montgomery mansion, already a place of constant movement, was transformed into a wedding planning center. Margaret, revealing an unexpected talent for organizing events, commanded an army of suppliers with the precision of a general. The dress has arrived, Rosa announced one afternoon, entering Isabella's office with a large box. Miss Margaret insisted that you try it on immediately. The dress was a masterpiece of elegant simplicity, Italian silk in a champagne shade that fitted her pregnant figure perfectly. When Isabella saw herself in the mirror of Catherine's old bedroom, now transformed into a stunning nursery in shades of pink and gold, tears began to stream down her face. You look beautiful, William's voice sounded from the doorway, making her turn around in surprise. You shouldn't see me before the wedding, she protested weakly. Some traditions are made to be broken, he smiled, entering the room. His eyes traveled around the transformed room, landing for a moment on the angel mobile that now hung over the restored antique cradle. Catherine would have loved all this, you know? She always said that the best stories are the ones nobody expects. Isabella felt little Catherine stir, as she always did when she heard William's voice. Sometimes I wonder if she somehow planned all this, she admitted softly, as if she was guiding us from the beginning. William hugged her from behind, his hands resting on the belly where his future daughter was growing. Maybe she was. Catherine was always better than the rest of us at seeing the bigger picture. The moment was interrupted by Margaret, who entered the room carrying samples of flowers. William Montgomery, get out of here right now. You can't see the bride before the big day. Too late, he laughed, but obeyed, not without first stealing a quick kiss from Isabella. Men, Margaret sighed dramatically, but there was a smile on her lips. Now about the flowers for the ceremony. The wedding date was set for 2 weeks from now in the garden of the Montgomery mansion. The same pool where it all began would be decorated with floating lanterns, transforming the site of a near tragedy into a symbol of new beginnings. That evening, after the mansion had finally fallen silent, Isabella found William in the library, looking through old family photos. Have you found anything interesting? She asked, taking a seat next to him. Our history, he replied, showing a recent photo of her saving him in the pool, captured by one of the security cameras. Next to it, a photo of Catherine laughing in her old office. Different chapters of the same book. Isabella entwined her fingers in his, feeling the comfortable weight of the engagement ring. A book that is still being written. The wedding preparations had turned the Montgomery mansion into a hub of frenetic activity. Isabella watched from the nursery window as a team of landscapers worked in the gardens, transforming the space around the pool into a modern fairy tale setting. Crystal lanterns hung from the branches of centuries-old trees, their soft lights reflecting in the now calm water of the pool where it all began. "The dress needs a few more adjustments." Margaret's voice brought her out of her thoughts. "The seamstress is coming this afternoon for the final fitting." Isabella turned around, one hand resting instinctively on her 8-month belly. "Any more fittings?" "The wedding is in 3 days, Margaret." "And you'll look perfect," Margaret declared with that characteristic Montgomery determination. Her eyes softened as she noticed Isabella's distant gaze. "What's worrying you?" "My father's arriving tomorrow," Isabella replied, returning her gaze to the window. "He hasn't seen William since." "Well, since I was just the housekeeper." Margaret approached, placing a comforting hand on Isabella's shoulder. "If he's half the man you described, he'll understand. Besides," she smiled, "no one can resist the Montgomery charm for long. You're living proof of that." A movement at the entrance to the mansion caught their attention. William was arriving, but he wasn't alone. Next to him walked a man who made Isabella's heart leap. Her father had arrived the day before. "Papa," she whispered, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Surprise," Margaret smiled. "William insisted on picking him up personally at the airport." Isabella went downstairs as quickly as her condition would allow, meeting her father in the entrance hall. Antonio Rodriguez, with his gray hair and face marked by the Arizona sun, opened his arms to his only daughter. "Mi pequeña," he murmured in her ear, hugging her gently. "Look at you, so beautiful, so huge," Isabella added with a broken laugh. "Radiant," her father corrected, pulling away to get a better look at her. His eyes found William, who was watching the scene with a gentle smile. "Your fiancé has been very convincing in his weekly phone calls." "Weekly calls?" Isabella looked at William in surprise. "Your father and I have been talking a lot over the last few months," William admitted. "About you, about our plans, about how he intends to make my daughter and granddaughter happy," Antonio added, his voice carrying a weight of approval that made Isabella cry even more. Little Catherine chose that moment to speak up with a vigorous kick, making Isabella laugh through her tears. She already recognizes her grandfather's voice. The rest of the afternoon was filled with stories shared in the mansion's library. Antonio told about Isabella's childhood in Arizona, about how she was always determined and brave, even when circumstances seemed impossible. William, for his part, shared his hopes for the future, his eyes shining every time he talked about the family they were building. "Catherine would have approved," Margaret commented softly over dinner, surprising everyone with her spontaneous declaration. "She always said that this mansion needed more life, more love." Antonio watched the interaction between the Montgomery brothers with interest. "Sometimes," he said, his voice laden with wisdom, "life takes something precious away from us just to show us that there are different kinds of love, different ways of being happy." That evening, after everyone had retired, Isabella found William in the library, looking at old family photos. Among them was a new addition, the photo of little Catherine's most recent ultrasound. "Your father is an extraordinary man," William commented when she sat down next to him. "Yes, he is," Isabella agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for bringing him the day before. I wanted to give you time to reconnect before the madness of the next few days," he explained, entwining his fingers in hers. "Besides, I needed his final approval for a surprise I had planned." Isabella raised her head, curious. "What surprise?" William smiled mysteriously. "You'll find out at the ceremony. Let's just say that I've found a way to honor all parts of our history, past and present." The full moon bathed the library in its silvery light, creating dancing shadows on the bookshelves. Outside, the lanterns in the garden twinkled like earthly stars, rehearsing for the big day ahead. 3 days, Isabella murmured, feeling little Catherine stir gently. 3 days, William agreed, his voice laden with promise. And then we officially begin our next chapter. The Montgomery mansion, which had already witnessed so many stories of love, loss, and redemption, seemed to vibrate with anticipation. In its ancient corridors and manicured gardens, a new story was about to be written. A story that proved that sometimes the happiest endings come from the most unexpected beginnings. The morning of the wedding rehearsal dawned with a particular softness in Greenwich. Isabella woke up to the sound of excited voices coming from the garden of the Montgomery mansion, where the last preparations were being finalized. In less than 24 hours, she would officially become part of this family that had already won her heart. Mi hija, Antonio knocked softly on the door of the guest room where Isabella was staying. William asked me to give you this. It was an antique blue velvet box, inside which was a delicate pearl necklace with a handwritten note. Something old for our new beginning. Love, W. It was his grandmother's, Margaret explained, appearing behind Antonio. Catherine wore it on a wedding day too. It's a Montgomery tradition. Isabella felt tears forming in her eyes as her father gently fastened the necklace around her neck. Little Catherine rippled, as if she too wanted to take part in the moment. Now, Margaret continued, her usual efficiency masking the emotion in her voice. We need to sort out the rehearsal. Reverend Johnson will be here in an hour, and a sudden commotion in the hallway interrupted her. Rosa, the housekeeper, rushed into the room. Miss Margaret, the Thompsons have just arrived. The silence that followed was heavy. Catherine's parents weren't expected until tomorrow for the ceremony. Isabella felt her heart racing, unsure of how to react to this unexpected situation. I'll take care of it, Margaret declared, her posture straightening. But before she could leave, William appeared in the doorway, accompanied by the Thompson couple. Isabella, he called softly, I'd like you to officially meet Robert and Claire Thompson. Claire Thompson, an elegant woman with the same kind eyes that Isabella had seen in Catherine's photos, came forward. In her hands, she held a small antique music box. We wanted to deliver this personally, she said, her voice trembling slightly. It was Catherine's favorite object as a baby. When we heard that you were going to name the little one after her, she paused, moved. Well, it seemed appropriate to pass it on. Isabella accepted the gift with trembling hands, opening it to hear a soft melody of Over the Rainbow fill the room. Little Catherine responded with a vigorous kick. She already recognizes the song. Isabella smiled through her tears. Catherine loved that tune too, Robert Thompson commented, his voice laden with memories. William told us how you saved him, how you've brought life back to this house. Our daughter, he looked at William with paternal affection, she would have approved. More than that, she would have celebrated. Margaret, who had remained extraordinarily silent, finally spoke. I think we all need a moment to pull ourselves together before the rehearsal. Rosa, could you serve tea in the winter garden? The rest of the morning passed in a whirlwind of emotions and activity. The rehearsal flowed perfectly, with Antonio practicing his walk alongside Isabella, while William waited at the makeshift altar near the pool, now decorated with thousands of floating flowers. During the lunch that followed, Isabella observed how the families naturally intermingled, the Thompsons chatting animatedly with their father about gardening, Margaret explaining Montgomery traditions to her Arizona cousins who had arrived for the ceremony. Is everything all right? William asked softly, finding a private moment with her in the library. Better than fine, Isabella replied, adjusting her pearl necklace. She hesitated. Sometimes it seems surreal, like it's too good to be true. William pulled her gently into his arms, one hand resting on her belly where his daughter moved. Do you know what Catherine always said? That the best love stories are the ones that take you by surprise. Like a housekeeper saving her boss from drowning? Isabella smiled. Like an extraordinary woman saving a man who had lost himself in his own pain, he corrected softly. Tomorrow, when we say our vows, we won't just be beginning our story. We'll be honoring all the stories that brought us here. The afternoon sun was beginning to lower, casting golden shadows through the library windows. In the garden, the lanterns were starting to be lit for one last test, their lights dancing like fireflies over the water of the pool. The Montgomery mansion, which had witnessed so many chapters of this improbable story, seemed to pulse with the promise of tomorrow. And as Isabella lay in William's arms, feeling their daughter move between them, she knew that some stories are destined to be written in the stars, just waiting for the right moment to shine. The wedding day dawned with a particular softness in Greenwich, as if the universe itself was conspiring to make the moment perfect. Isabella woke up to the sound of movement in the corridors of the Montgomery mansion, her heart beating in a mixture of anxiety and happiness that made little Catherine stir in her womb. "It's Tommy Hija." Antonio knocked softly on the bedroom door. Beside him, Margaret entered carrying her wedding dress, her eyes shining with restrained tears. "The guests are arriving," Margaret informed as she helped Isabella into the dress. And William, well, I've never seen him so nervous. Not even at his first wedding. Isabella smiled, adjusting the pearl necklace around her neck. "How are the Thompsons?" "Claire is helping with the last of the flower arrangements," Margaret replied, her voice soft. "She said Catherine always loved white lilies, so we added some to the original arrangements." The champagne dress fell perfectly over Isabella's pregnant figure, the delicate fabric flowing like water. Margaret worked in silence, arranging her hair in a loose bun decorated with small white flowers. "Something old," she said, touching the pearl necklace. "Something new," she pointed to the dress. "Something borrowed." She put a delicate sapphire bracelet on her wrist. "And something blue." "Margaret." Isabella held her future sister-in-law's hand. "Thank you for everything." "No," Margaret smiled, tears finally escaping. "Thank you for bringing my brother back to life." A soft sound of music began to drift through the gardens. The string orchestra was starting the ceremony. Isabella took a deep breath, feeling little Catherine stir, as if she too was looking forward to the moment. The garden of the Montgomery mansion had been transformed into a fairy tale setting. Crystal lanterns hung from the centuries-old trees, their lights dancing over the pool, now covered with thousands of white rose petals. The guests were seated on elegant white chairs, a path of flowers marking the way to the makeshift altar. William was waiting at the end of this path, impeccable in his tuxedo, his eyes shining with barely contained emotion. At his side, Reverend Johnson smiled serenely, and next to him, the Thompsons looked on with expressions of approval and affection. When the wedding march began, Antonio offered Isabella his arm. "Lista, mi pequeña?" Isabella nodded, unable to speak through the knot in her throat. Each step along the flower-lined path seemed laden with meaning, each petal representing a moment that had brought them there. William couldn't take his eyes off her as he approached. When she finally reached the altar, he held out his hand, helping her up the small steps. "We gather today," Reverend Johnson began, "to celebrate not just a union, but a miracle of love. A love that was born from the ashes of loss, that blossomed through courage and hope." William sniffled softly before beginning his vows. "Isabella Rodriguez, you came into my life like a force of nature, saving me not just from the water, but from the darkness that had taken over my heart. You taught me that it's possible to love again, that it's possible to find light even in the darkest moments." Isabella felt tears streaming down her face as William continued. "I promise to honor not only our love, but all the stories that brought us here. I promise to be a father to our little Catherine, carrying in her name not just a tribute, but a promise of eternal love." When it was her turn, Isabella took a deep breath. "William Montgomery, you showed me that some stories are written in the stars, just waiting for the right moment to shine. I promise to be your partner in all the chapters to come. I promise to raise our daughter with the same love and courage that brought us together, and I promise to always believe in the transformative power of love." Little Catherine chose that moment to give a vigorous kick, making them both smile through their tears. In the audience, Margaret held Claire Thompson's hand, both crying silently. "By the powers vested in me," Reverend Johnson proclaimed, "I now pronounce you man and wife." The kiss that sealed their union was interrupted by emotional applause. When they parted, William kept a protective hand on Isabella's belly, where their daughter continued to wiggle excitedly. The reception that followed was a celebration of life and love. Antonio danced with Margaret. The Thompsons shared stories with their cousins from Arizona, and the Montgomery mansion pulsed with a joy it hadn't felt for a long time. At dusk, while the lanterns shone like earthly stars, William led Isabella to the library, her refuge since the beginning of this story. "I have something to show you," he said, guiding her to a new addition on the wall. A photo of them in the pool, from the day she saved him, now framed next to the photo of his wedding to Catherine. "Different chapters of the same love story," Isabella murmured, understanding the meaning. A story that continues, William added, his hand finding hers on the belly where their daughter rested. With new characters and new miracles, Montgomery Manor, which had witnessed so much love and loss, now held a new promise. The promise that love, in all its forms, had the power to heal, transform, and create new beginnings. And as the sun set over Greenwich, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Isabella and William Montgomery began their new chapter, not just as husband and wife, but as guardians of a story that proved that the happiest endings sometimes come from the most unexpected beginnings.